celebration of the life, work, and mission of Tommy Greenan. Our hope for this evening is to reinforce and help spread awareness of Tommy's work and especially of his book, The Song of the Poor, here in Scotland and also further afield. This is the format for the evening. After our gathering prayer, we will watch a recording of the launch of the Song of the Poor held in St Mary's Cathedral, Edinburgh on the 8th of May this year. After the film, we will have the opportunity to have a conversation with Father Henry McLaughlin, a close compadre of Tommy, using your contributions, which hopefully you put into the chat. We now start with a gathering prayer using the words of Archbishop Romero, a huge influence on Tommy. As we gather together in prayer, let us remember all those places in the world where violence seems to triumph. We spend a few moments in solidarity with our sisters and brothers in Gaza, in Sudan, Ukraine, Myanmar, Yemen, Colombia, and all places where children, women, and men are hurt and killed by warfare and injustice.
We know that every effort to better society, especially when injustice and sin are so ingrained, is an effort that God blesses, that God wants, that God demands of us.
A civilization of love that did not demand justice for people would not be a true civilization. We believe love must win out. It is the only thing that can. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Let us now move on, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Father Henry McLaughlin, who will lead us into the video that we are going to watch this evening. Henry is a great friend of Scottish Laity Network and was a compadre, a friend, a colleague of Tommy Greenan and worked alongside him in El Salvador. Henry, is known to many of us probably who are with us tonight, was born in Edinburgh in 1946 and at the age of 2 went to his family home in Achill Island on the west coast of Ireland and stayed there until he was 7. And as he said so many times himself, it had a very significant impact on his thinking. The sound of the ocean that still is very important to him today. Training for the priesthood was in Rome, where he spent 7 years, and then came back to Edinburgh and spent time in the Cathedral in Edinburgh, where he was instrumental in starting a group which led numbers of people from across the Edinburgh city to come together to share and to think and to explore their faith and their journey through faith. Moving to St Ninian's in Edinburgh, where with Father Jock Dalrymple, he worked in a parish community that had at its root, an open community, a community where people would spend time together collectively, not just using the church, but also all the parish resources, the house, whatever else was available to them. In 82, 83, Henry then took a sabbatical and he spent time with nuns and priests working for the poor in 12 countries from Chile in South America to El Salvador in Central America, spending two of those weeks in different refugee camps. From 84 to 94, he spent that time in El Salvador, and that's where he worked alongside Tommy Greenan, and then moved to Chiapas in southern Mexico in 95, where he remained until 220. He came back to Edinburgh then, and although nominally retired, and I would stress that nominally because he seems to be an extremely busy person. He's doing a lot of supply work, but is still engaging with numbers of people, across the communities. He took on to promote the work of Tommy Greenan, and it's become a very kind of critical part of his work and engagement over the last number of years. And it's with a lot of joy and happiness that I welcome Henry to be with us tonight. Thank you, Henry.
Right. Thanks, Jerry. Good evening, everyone. Tommy joined me in 1986 to 94. A number of years ago, when I was talking about what I might do when I'd retire, people had asked me told me I should write down my stories, and that was kind of my retirement plan. However, a friend said, of the 4 of the Edinburgh priests who went to El Salvador, Tommy was by far the best writer. I then had a look at Tommy's stories and could see that Tommy was a brilliant storyteller, a brilliant writer, and far better than myself. And so instead of me launching my book, I've been involved in getting Tommy's book published. And Lewis Cedar, I think, has done a brilliant job of filming and editing the film of Tommy's book launch in the Cathedral. So I'm now quite confident all of you are going to enjoy the film of the launch. Thank you. In 1986, the Archbishop of San Salvador appointed myself and Tommy to the parish of San Francisco Morazan. I was appointed the parish priest and Tommy appointed the curate. Traditionally, the curate was seen as assisting the parish priest, carrying out what the parish priest told them to do. Very early on, Tommy told me the story of his time in Livingston, when at an ecumenical gathering of some priests and Church of Scotland ministers, Charlie Barclay introduced Tommy to one of the ministers, and the minister replied, and Father Tommy is your assistant. Father Charlie replied, no, Tommy is my colleague. Tommy believed in obedience to God, but not to a parish priest. I wisely accepted that, and we worked well together as a team, and all the decisions jointly taking them.
It's a great pleasure to welcome a panel of people here that we have. Rosa Murray is going to be your MC for the evening and is going to conduct proceedings.
So who are you?
I am Tommy's niece.
Tommy's niece?
Yeah.
And so that's why you came?
Yes.
And did you actually know him?
Yes, we did.
And what was he like?
He was brilliant. He was very witty, full of humour. Swore like a trooper.
Shut up, I'm supposed to say that. They made money because they had a swear tin.
Oh, I see.
So every time with them,
Hang on, we've got to get this on this. Come on, tell us all about it. They had a swear tin. This is the priest, right?
And he used to come in and go, right before I start.
My name is Thomas Mullen. I knew Father Tommy when he was a student in Lourdes. He was with the HCPT, I was with the HCPT, and we were both in seminary at the same time, only he was in Spain and I was in Dry Grange in Scotland. A lovely lad, yes, a great memories.
Hello, I'm Canon Brian Gowns, parish priest in Kirkcaldy, and many years ago I was in Blair's College, and in the year above me was a young fella called Tommy Greenan, And Tommy was so enthusiastic about Latin America that we even nicknamed him, as young as he was then, Che, after Che Guevara. So it came as no surprise to me to learn that he spent most of his priestly life in Latin America doing exactly what he did, what he always wanted to do and loved doing. And it was great to catch up with Tommy when he came back to the diocese. I used to meet up with him in Gillis Centre and we'd chew the fat together and I'd listen to some of his stories. And then, of course, tragically he passed, and loved by so many people, and in typical Pope Francis mood, a great ambassador for the poor. So I'm here tonight just to pay my respect to a very great man.
That St. Augustine, 1500 years ago, said something which I think is truly profound and insightful, and I think it's what we've been talking about tonight. He said, "Charity is no substitute for justice withheld." Charity is no substitute for justice withheld. And in a way, I think, reflecting on Tommy's life and Henry's work with him, it does make me think about the wonderful ideas that came out of liberation theology. I say that as an atheist, by the way. But I think they're truly, truly stunning and very important. I think it links up with what you said, charity and Marxism. But what Francis did, what Tommy did, I think was very, very significant, because they didn't talk about charity, they talked about justice. When Francis spoke to the miners of Bolivia, he condemned the unfettered greed of the rich and the wealthy, and he called it the dung of the devil. And you know, people are a bit, this was quoting a 4th century bishop, and what he got on to say then was, poverty is structural. Poverty is structural. So,
in his teens and in his early 20s, Tommy was angered by many of the rules and restrictions of the authoritarian seminary regimes. He felt they were trying to force him into the mould of a clerical priest. He writes in his private diary, "But please, let me be who I am. Don't impose stupid, petty inhibitions on my living. Let me be responsible. After all, it's me who has to render an account of myself at the end of time." Tommy also talks about Spanish Augustinian priests who impressed him. He writes again, "They were real human beings who taught me the value of free thinking within the church. They were men of great intelligence, but also of great simplicity. These priests took their vocation seriously, and you wouldn't find a clerical dog collar among them. It's a humbler, less presumptuous way they live, which doesn't demand the priest to stand on his title or his dignity and expect esteem from those around. Any other way of being priest would stifle me, threatening to take away my humanity, which is the most basic thing I got."
My name's Rosa Murray, and like many of you, knew Tommy and was very inspired by Tommy, by his person, by his mission, his vision, and of course his ministry. And tonight we're here to celebrate the life and the stories that Tommy wrote, and also the people of El Salvador, whom he's brought into such visible light for us through his reflections. Welcome to everybody, and always particularly to all those from Tommy's family.
Tommy was my best friend, as well as my brother. But a lot of people didn't know that Tommy's education didn't come easily for him. Tommy had a name that he wanted to be a priest from when he was 5-year-old, and he went for it. And I remember a teacher at St. John's Portobello said to him, "Tommy, you'll never be a priest. You'll need to go try and be the White Fathers or something like that, but we didn't need the education you require from a normal priest." And with Tommy got his degrees and things like that, I said to him, "Tam, come on, we'll go down to Portobello, and he's still there, and we'll take him in and say, come on, let's see Europe versus mine." He wouldn't do it. He hesitated though. I think he was going to do it. But, I mean, I went on holiday with Tommy, and people used to say to me, "You went on holiday with a guy that's going to be a priest?" And I said, "That guy's my brother and my pal." And we had some great times in Valladolid. There was one time, just a quick story, but it was quite funny. There was one time we went there, and we got into a hotel because all the hotels were all booked up, because there was parades and things like that. So we come out of this room, I see women walking about, dressing gowns and that. I say to Tommy, "Women walking about?" He says, "It's a siesta, Gordon, for goodness sake, guys, it's a siesta." So Tommy had to go back to the Scots College, and he put me on with this guy called Manolo Santiago, who was a priest. So Manolo says, "I'll show you around," and he couldn't speak much English, and I couldn't speak Spanish. "I'll show you around." And I learned how to drink red wine, I'll tell you, and I learned what it did to my head. But when he took us back to the hotel, he looked and he went, "Oh my God, that's a brothel we use better." Anyway, Tommy was just a normal person, and he was a great person, and he was a great personality. I had fights with him, I had arguments with him, I had debates with him. He used to run things by me saying, "See if I said that at St. John's Portobello, what would you think?" And I'm not going to get it. But any controversy that he said, I advised him against it, because I'm not taking blame for it.
We're going to do a couple of conversations with Tommy's sister, Carol, and with Henry here, who worked with Tommy, and readings from the book.
This morning I rose at about 6:30 a.m. and went outside into the daylight. A bullet had chipped the lintel about 2 yards from where I was standing. I was questioned by one soldier. Then on leaving the village, a group of them stopped me and took me behind the church, out of sight of the villagers. They were quite gruff, and one of them accused me of lying when I said I was a priest. He then helped himself to the contents of my belt pouch after getting a mate to cover me with his rifle. He scrutinized my documentation and took note of my name and number of my residence card. They found my detailed map with the markings of the places I was to visit and confiscated it. They radioed the High Command for them to check out with the Archbishop my possession of this map, which interested and irked them. Then, following the Jeff and Mutt routine, their leader apologised for the inconvenience and dismissed me with a veiled intimidation that they would come for me later on if they found it necessary to do so. I feel uneasy with my vulnerability. But if I'm killed, it'll be because I've sided with the downtrodden, and I will have died for the sake of the downtrodden, not primarily for the sake of Christ, only secondarily for the sake of Christ, because he identified so completely with the downtrodden. As I write, the hills continue to be bombed and machine-gunned from helicopters, and people are, quote, afflicted, as one woman put it, and the little children are frightened. I wish the United States government would stop providing weapons and machines for war. I wish the money allocated for this barbarity were given to save the lives of children suffering and dying from diseases which aren't fatal in the first world. This evening in the Eucharist, we read from Mark chapter 4, where Jesus calms the storm and saves the lives of his frightened followers. The people of El Salvador are in the same situation, except it's not the waves of the sea, but the bombs of the air which menace. Rosa asked me if I'd say something about what struck me. I must warn you that she gave me about 2 minutes' notice to do that in typical Rosa and Henry fashion. But one thing did strike me. I remember when I started at high school and my high school RE teacher having a sign on the wall that spoke, and I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but it spoke to the amount of money spent on bombs compared to that which would end world hunger. And to read the line there, I wish the United States government would stop providing weapons and machines for war. I can't help but think that there's a few governments, not least the US, that could still be heeding that message today for our sisters and brothers in the Holy Land and around the world.
Tommy worried about getting hurt. He had a strong feeling he could get hurt in peaceful Scotland, where basically we're all pretty, if not very safe. Really, there's no justification for feeling so vulnerable here in Scotland. But in a country where the government forces in El Salvador had already murdered the Archbishop and 12 other priests, the war zone wasn't a place for insecure people with paranoia. But Tommy Greenan chose El Salvador. He wrote in his diary, talking about his ordination, "I lay before the altar. I dedicate my whole life to God and other people." Tommy lived out that commitment, and it showed real courage of the strength he had to face and overcome his demons of getting hurt, and deciding to come to a place where there was a great probability he could not only be hurt, he could be murdered.
We're here to celebrate his life. As we all know, he chose to live and work among the poorest of the poor in Latin America, particularly, of course, in Salvador. He was deeply inspired by Oscar Romero, and he shared the poverty, fears, and grief of the communities in which he lived. Amid all the dangers as well, I think sometimes we forget that there was a lot of danger in his work, and not to romanticise it, but it was quite a scary time. He wrote the reflections and stories and meditations, giving witness, I suppose, and making visible to the lives of those that he shared. And I don't know about you, but I wonder, with all he was doing, how did he have the time to write all these stories and take the time to reflect and have them there? Had he not done this, we would have been deprived of a great deal of real stories of real people living in some of the poorest communities in fear of their lives and the injustices that they faced. They're an amazing chronicle, testimony of the life of the poor and him. Carol, welcome, Carol. This is Tommy's sister. And really, it's just an informal conversation about being Tommy's sister, growing up in the Greenan family in Edinburgh. Do you want to just tell us a bit about that?
Well, my mum and dad had 10 children. I'm the 9th, Tommy was the 3rd. So we've all got a number. Joe's the 10th, sitting there with his bald head shining. But the two that my mum had the most stories about was my brother Tommy, and Gordon followed not long after. So Gordon's sitting there too, shaking his head. I mean, they must have been bad because there was 10 of us and we were no angels. One of the stories that she likes to tell is my sister Alice, who's after Gordon. Alice would come home some days and her dolls had been scalped, hung from the banister, war painted with my mum's lipstick, a product of Tommy and Gordon's Cowboys and Indian Games. Even in their adulthood, well, Tommy's no longer with us, but Gordon is. They both claimed that they were found guilty. They were found guilty on circumstantial evidence. Just because they were wearing cowboy hats did not mean to say that they were the ones who scalped the dolls. It was a close family, and it was nice, yeah.
And growing up, what sort of things did he like?
Football mad, actually, and a real Hibs fan. And every time he was home, he would be at the Hibs match. In fact, all my brothers were. Unfortunately, it was a great disappointment for my dad, because my dad was a staunch Hearts supporter. But he used to go to the Hearts and Hibs game with my brothers, but he would stand in the Hibs enclosure and going, yes, every time Hearts scored.
Junior seminary, about age 11?
12, I think, 12 when he went. Yeah, I don't remember much about that because he's 11 years older than me. I do remember him going to Madrid, to study for the priesthood. It was a great wrench on my mum. My mum liked us. My mum liked us all near, and I think she found it quite hard. But she knew that this was what he wanted.
And she would have been very proud of him too.
She was extremely proud of him. Yeah, we all are. We all are.
So he obviously was ordained, and he when he was in Latin America, was he able to stay in touch with you all, or?
Well, that's actually how the book came about. Tommy would write letters to Mum and Dad, and he would always include a story at the back, sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes humorous. And that is what this book is made up from, these stories.
Experiences he must have had be quite traumatic.
I remember November 1989, I had not long been married, and I can remember getting ready for work, and my phone goes, and it's about 8 o'clock in the morning. And it's never good news when your phone goes at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was my brother Gordon phoned me to say, have you seen the news? And I hadn't, and he says, there has 6 priests been killed in El Salvador. So, as you can imagine, the whole family, as I said, there's 10 of us, the phones are all going, we're phoning the Archbishop's office to find out, we're really trying to find if my brother was dead or alive. It was really traumatic. It took until, and Henry was there with Tommy, it took 4 hours for Tommy to get a message to us that he was safe. They were heading into the hills, they were going into hiding, but we were not to worry. But it was the longest 4 hours of my life. It really was. It was awful. Our family got good news, but there was 7 families, because it was 6 priests, housekeeper, and our daughter had all been killed, and it was extremely traumatic and tragic. Yeah.
Showed you the dangers, I suppose, that Tommy was working in, and many priests were working in at that time. And yet he wouldn't have done anything else, would he?
No.
One of your brothers in the book, I think, says he was always there for his family.
If there was anything he could do for you, he would. But I think we're all like
you would all do it. You would all support each other. Yeah. So you must miss him, Carol. The whole family must miss him.
When we're together, Tommy always comes up. Yeah. It's a hole in the family that just can't be filled.
Rising from the grave. I had never conducted a burial like this before. The dead young man had been killed by a bullet wound to his left side. This happened in Santa Ana during the time of the coffee picking. The guerrilla, in their war tactic to ruin the economy, attacked government soldiers guarding the plantation. There was a crossfire, and Jorge was shot dead. We followed the coffin to the cemetery. I marveled at the dignified restraint of the mourners. The composed, self-possessed wife carried a small pillow and cloth, and the reason for this baffled me. The grey coffin swayed and snaked its way forward, carried by pallbearers, who showed signs of overindulgence with the local firewater. At the side of the open grave, the deceased brother conducted a brawl with a youngster who tried in vain to pacify him. They rolled in the dust, fists flying, words slurred. To cover the embarrassment, we thought it best to lower the coffin immediately and proceed with prayer. Jorge's wife interrupted, bringing forward the small pillow and cloth. She asked that the coffin lid be removed in order that she could lay the pillow beneath her deceased husband. Owing to the heat, decomposition of mortal remains is swift. There is a glass peek hole in the coffin lid to allow mourners to look in without taking off the lid. Jorge's wife stooped and looked through the peek hole. She released a high-pitched wail. Other women joined in and orchestrated their grief. A drunk tottered to the fore with a hammer and started to prise at the lid. An old woman expressed her reservations publicly. I agreed with her and suggested we lower the coffin, gently taking the wife aside. When they began to lower, I foresaw what was about to happen. The coffin tilted on the cords, twirled a half circle, and clattered face down to the bottom of the grave. The wailing went into crescendo. The drunk culprits looked gormless. A sober young man jumped down and twisted the coffin upright. It was a comedy of errors, though nobody was laughing. He couldn't get out, so I extended my right hand and levered him to the surface. This was the only time I raised anybody from the grave. So, like Callum, Rosa sprung it on me and said, "Would you like to say a few words about the reading when you finish?" I've known Henry since his first time here in the Cathedral, and he kept in touch with a lot of us while he was in El Salvador, giving us news of himself and also of Tommy. And Henry would write letters about what was happening, some of it very scary. I do remember him saying once he was run off the road when he was on his motorbike, but he thought it was an accident because the people actually came back and checked he was okay. So Henry also sent some letters, some of the letters that Tommy had written, and this is one that I got quite a number of years ago and always remembered it. Because of the humour, but because of the humanity. Tommy was standing there, and there's not a word of criticism of all the nonsense that's going on, and people drinking too much, and the whole humanity of the situation, I think, was something that he was able to accept. He got very angry, obviously, with the powers that be and the violence that was around, but the people were the people he loved, and that comes across in everything that he writes.
My name's Anna Lamb, and I'm from St Mary's, Star of the Sea parish.
All right. And what brought you to this place tonight?
Well, I never ever met Father Tommy, but I knew of him, and I was at St Ninian's when I was a teenager, and I had Father Henry there, and he was a great influence in our social conscience, pricked it, and just we learned all about South America, the injustices that are going on there, and I believe Father Tommy spent a lot of his time there and was one of the people, one of the good guys.
Growing up, I felt a calling to be a priest, and basically felt a calling, or it seemed sensible to me, to try and do something worthwhile, something with meaning in my life. And so I did my studies in Rome, and my first full-time appointment was here in the Cathedral in 1971. When I was in Rome doing the studying, we had the Vatican Council. Before the Vatican Council, it was a very different church. It was, people talk of it as a ghetto church. A close friend, neighbour, might have died, and Catholics couldn't attend the funeral service, couldn't go into the kirk. A church radically different from today. Vatican Council work that the bishops had done. Thinking, well, the emphasis too was very much church-centred, looking for a church of community and communities and the relationships within them. I thoroughly enjoyed my 5 years here, not to the pleasure of everyone, but I introduced guitar folk masses, starting off with the 9 p.m. on a Sunday night. Nobody else at the end of the weekend of masses and confessions wanted to do it. But at the end of the 5 years, I felt that it'd be good to work with a priest who was very committed to the Vatican Council. The priests here were great and whatnot, but they weren't as enthused about the council as me, so I asked for a change. In 1976, went down to St. Ninian's Wrestlebrig. I got what I was looking for, and then strangely enough, I felt something was missing. I felt a spark was missing, and eventually got permission for a sabbatical year and in Latin America. I started off in Chile and travelled thousands of miles by land, visiting nuns and priests who were working with the poor. It was the best year of my life. Quite clear in my mind, I was going to have 1 year there. I was going to enjoy it and then come back and continue working in Edinburgh. I went out there and I spent 39 years in Latin America. Everywhere I went, the poor were very welcoming. They were very kind, they were very caring, and they loved me. And because of that, then I fell in love with them as well. In Latin America, I discovered that what Jesus was talking about was more than just the good news. He was saying the good news to the poor. And I met Jesus there. I met the poor, and basically, when we meet the poor, Jesus says that we are meeting him in Matthew 25. I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. When you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. I was really shocked by the poverty in Peru, the Aymaras and Quechuas. When I went back to Chile, I thought, this is great. It looked so comfortable in comparison with Peru. So much of what Jesus was saying and the conditions at the time of Jesus, of time of oppression, the superpower who had violently taken over Palestine, that the suffering of the poor was absolutely horrific. I knew then eventually I had to go back to work in Latin America, and I asked for permission for 6 years, and I had no thought whatsoever that anybody might want to join me. And so it was a surprise to me. It was 1985, I think it was, when Tommy indicated. Tommy, he was brilliant at the Spanish language, and he'd always, I think, thought of Latin America, and then he decided he'd like to join me. The best year of my life was my sabbatical year, and I suggested to Tommy that he did a mini sabbatical. So what it took me a year to do, Tommy did in 90 days. And Tommy's experience was pretty well identical to mine in the way the poor were so caring and so loving, and both of us very happy, very glad to be working with the poor. One of the key things about Tommy was his sense of justice and injustice. Tommy would get quite moved and would get angry when he saw injustice. Tommy, as a child at school, he'd been bullied. He actually wrote a wee bit about having paranoia. He had, I say, a strong sense of justice, which is a basic message in the Bible. The stories Tommy has written, you see that Tommy is looking, is observing, and has a similar interest in those who are suffering. There's one instance where there's soldiers had come into our main base, San Francisco, and they were hassling, giving a rough time, the refugees who had settled in a bombed out village of ours. Tommy almost ran to the lieutenant who was there with his soldiers, and he was, really telling the lieutenant off in a war situation where these people are killing campesinos, but also killing priests and whatnot. It wasn't the wisest thing to do, but Tommy, I say, compassion, passion, and action as well. Myrna, when she was probably only about 14, she was pregnant. And there's another person from the community of San Francisco, a man, attacked her to rape her. Tommy heard the screams, and Myrna says he defended her with his feet and with his fists.
Hello, my name is Jim McKelvey. I was a student with Tommy in seminary in the Royal Scottish College in Valladolid in Spain for 4 years. I left unordained after 4 years and Tommy went to ordination. And we kept up a friendship for the rest of our lives. And I had the privilege of working, playing a small part in getting Tommy's book to publication. And any of you who knew Tommy and have read the book, I think you'll agree that Tommy's personality jumps off every page of the book. My memories of Tommy in seminary, I have very fond memories of Tommy. Tommy was a very deep, funny, difficult, stubborn, all these words, introverted in some ways, but very spiritual. I remember we had to be in church every morning by 7:15, and I don't think anybody could beat Tommy to the church. No matter what time you were going to the church, Tommy was always there before you. And I don't know how long he spent every day in front of the sacraments. He was very faithful, Tommy. He was very principled as well. Principled to the extent of being very stubborn and sometimes very stupid. So, seminaries 50, this was in the 1970s, seminaries 15 years ago were very strict and very hierarchical and very, you knew where you were in the rank system. And, but Tommy had no respect for rank or authority. Tommy had an inbuilt suspicion and antipathy towards authority, and that continued for the rest of his life. It made life very difficult sometimes for Tommy and for his fellow students, because very often we say to Tommy, for goodness sake, just do as you're told, make life easier for the rest of us. And that was Tommy, he was very, very principled. Tommy used to amuse Spaniards by speaking to them in flowery, courtly, 18th century Spanish, just to show off, you know. And this was going on with me. There was one incident I remember. This was pre-1970, it was obviously pre-internet. And all Spanish football games are played on a Sunday then. But if you missed the football results on Sunday, You had to wait till Monday morning to read the paper to get football results. And I remember being out for a walk between classes one Monday morning with Tommy and a fellow student, Joe Toll, now Bishop Toll, one of them. And Joe was a great football fan, loved Spanish football. So we stopped at one of these kiosks, one of these Spanish kiosks with newspaper kiosks. The guy sitting there, prisoner in this kiosk. And Joe picked up a newspaper, and for 5 minutes he read the newspaper and the results, and folded it up and put it back. And the newspaper read, I was very rightly indignant. Joe had picked up his paper and read it and put it back without paying for it. And he started shouting at us, insulting us. And Tommy took this up as a challenge. And Tommy started shouting back, insulting him. So this went on for about 5 minutes. The guy's hanging out the kiosk, shouting at Tommy, and Tommy shouting back. And the rhetoric would get higher and higher, and his insults were more and more personal, until the two of them were calling into the professional reputation of each other's mothers. But that was Tommy. Tommy loved Spanish, and he loved practicing it, and all the rest of it. So Tommy and I used to go walking together, went to Spain, walking holidays. And the knock comes to the door, and says, "Who is it?" And he's living in. And he walks in but Mother Teresa. So Tommy got the shock of his life. And when they got back to the chapel house, she gave Tommy a copy of her book. And Tommy says to her, "Could you sign it for me, please?" And she said, so she said, and Tommy says, "That's good, because it'll make it more valuable when I sell it." And she said, Tommy says she wasn't happy at all. So, and I said to Tommy, "You're the only person I know that could fall out with Mother Teresa." That was Tommy.
The last 10 years, I suppose, of Tommy's life, I was his dentist. Tommy came down to the practice and left a letter for me, asking if I could take him on as a patient. But if I couldn't, that was fine as well. A very gentle message. So that week, in fact later that day, I phoned the Cathedral House and left a message to say, of course, I tell Father Greenan I would see him. I would take him on as a patient. But a few weeks passed and there was no call from Tommy to make an appointment. So I phoned the Cathedral House again, and of course Tommy never got the message, but eventually he got the message and he came down, and he'd come home every 6 months, I think. He worked for 6 months and came home for 6 months. And I'd always see him. I'd always be worried what would happen if he had a dental problem when he was in Latin America. But he never did, because he took care of his teeth well. And then when he came home for good, he never had major dental problems until he was struck with dementia. And then he broke his front tooth. And this is what I remember most. So to restore this tooth, he'd need to have a root filling, endodontics, and need 2 appointments. I need to put a gold post into his tooth, 2 appointments, and a new crown, 2 appointments. Now, even for somebody with all their faculties, this was quite difficult to do on a patient. And for somebody with Tommy's problem, it was really, really difficult. But for whatever reason, maybe the power of the Holy Spirit, we got through all of that. We did the 6 appointments, and at the end of it all, I was able to fit his new crown and restore his smile. So when I think of Tommy, that's what I think about. But what a lovely, gentle, humble man, almost shy man. And of course, it was so sad, as somebody said, we couldn't go to his funeral. But we all miss him. God rest him.
Thanks, Father.
I was at seminary with Tommy in Blair's, over 50 years ago. And it's strange, isn't it, just how what people go on to do and how their talent can manifest itself. And just listening to his writing there, you realise just how an eloquent writer he was. It was George Orwell who used to always say, it's wonderful when you don't see the writing, it's almost like a window and it's transparent, and you just allow yourself not to be taken away with fancy language, but just get to the heart of it. And it struck me that Tommy, in those pieces, did that tonight. So I think it's wonderful you put it together, genuinely so congratulations, and I hope many, many people will read it. It was actually strange, a bit surreal. Just as Henry asked me to speak tonight, I was leaving and the new Pope came onto the balcony, and they said he was an Augustinian. And then, for some reason, it reminded me of Tommy. And the reason I make that connection is that St. Augustine, 1500 years ago, said something which I think is truly profound and insightful, and I think it's what we'll be talking about tonight. He said, "Charity is no substitute for justice withheld." Charity is no substitute for justice withheld. And in a way, I think, reflecting on Tommy's life and Henry's work with him, it does make me think about the wonderful ideas that came out of liberation theology. I say that as an atheist, by the way. But I think they're truly, truly stunning and very important. I think it links up with what you said, charity and martyrdom. But what Francis did, what Tommy did, I think was very, very significant, because they didn't talk about charity, they talked about justice. When Francis spoke to the miners of Bolivia, he condemned the unfettered greed of the rich and the wealthy, and he called it the dung of the devil. And you know, people are a bit... This was quoting a 4th century bishop. And what he got on to say then was, poverty is structural. Poverty is structural. And try and understand the big picture. It's not about charity, it's not about fond words. It's making an analysis of how poverty works and how it destroys lives. And when that Campesino said it was imperialism, that is really, really important to remember. It's important to remember that Roberto D'Avison, who murdered Oscar Romero, he was trained in the School of Americas. It was a right-wing paramilitary group, and they were teaching a lesson to someone who stood for the poor. It was the same people who murdered, that you mentioned, you got so worried about, the Jesuits in El Salvador, because once again, they were on the side of the poor, but not in any kind of gentle manner. They were doing work, analysing poverty, coming together. They talked about praxis. They said, let's reflect on it together, and how do we build justice and peace in their lives. So it was very, very practical. It was about justice, it was about humanity. So I think when we reflect on Tommy's life, reflecting what Francis stood for too, who talked about structural poverty, who condemned the war and the genocide in taking place in front of our eyes just now in Palestine, I think it's really, really important that institutions like the Church, you know, remember these wonderful inspirational insights from St. Augustine, from Pope Francis, and the eloquence of the wonderful Tommy.
This one's titled El Imperialismo. It's dated the 21st of November 1987. Jose Medardo Avila, A.N.A. Olympia Avila, Alessandro Avila, Sonia Elizabeth Amaya, So Avila. It was just a list of names to me, a list spoken by a Campesino who asked that they be prayed for in the Eucharist. They're all deceased relatives, I asked rather clinically. But his eyes moistened with tears and he answered, "They're my children. They killed them." Taken aback by what he was telling me, I asked another question. Who killed them? He almost whispered his reply. The imperialism. I questioned no further so as not to cut into unhealed scars. A father's children had been killed by the army, and he knows that the guns and the bombs and the planes and the helicopter are all sent to El Salvador by the empire of the United States government. The empire killed his children. Words on paper don't describe the tears in the eyes of a bereaved father, nor do words convey his soft, sad whisper. of el imperialismo. When I was studying to teach RE, a friend of mine, a priest from Motherwell Diocese, said to me that the Church has the privilege of spending the most vulnerable moments of people's lives with them, the very, very beginning and the very, very end. And I think over the years, I, maybe like most of you, have grown quite comfortable with that truth, but I can't even begin to imagine the challenge, the heartbreak that you're faced with when the enormity of empire and power and wealth is what you're faced with, and to try and console and bring comfort to someone whose loss isn't the responsibility just of one man holding a gun, but of entire nation states, of, as Henry puts it bluntly, the West. And I think that's one that we'll all wrestle with. But the words of Tommy certainly help me to understand that challenge and to challenge myself and ourselves to think about what we can do about it.
Tom, it's who enabled, edited the stories. Just a very brief comment about why you thought these were so important for today.
I didn't know Tommy at all. I don't know anything about El Salvador, and it was pure chance or maybe divine intervention, I don't know, but Tommy's family, friends and people that had read the pieces that he'd sent home in letters were absolutely determined after his death to get the things published. But obviously they didn't necessarily have any contacts in publishing, but purely by chance, Henry and me share very a mutual friend, a very dear friend, Father John Halsey of the Community of the Transfiguration. John Halsey knew that I'd worked for many years in publishing, and so I might have some idea about how to get a book published. Now, if you've worked in publishing for a long time like me, quite often people will come up to you and say, I've got a great idea for a book, look at this, what do you think? And very often you have to kind of sort of bite your tongue and say, it sometimes isn't very good, and you're sort of saying, oh well, it's very interesting, but I don't think publishers are looking for this kind of thing at the moment. So when I started reading Tommy's material, I was immediately struck by the quality of it. I mean, it is very striking writing, and it's not just stories of doing good work somewhere, or it's not just documentary accounts of life amongst the poor. It's not just spiritual lessons like a sermon or whatever. They're actually they have a literary quality. They are carefully crafted. Tommy wasn't just jotting things down willy-nilly. They're carefully crafted pieces which are, in a way, they draw you in, and they're almost addictive. Once you start reading, they're very short pieces, but once you start reading them, you have to read another one and another one, and it is a book which is writing which deserves to be published. And Henry and the friends, Jim and various, the whole list of people were involved in preparing the book for publication. And we managed to get Darton, Longman and Todd, who were one of the oldest publishers around, to take it on. And this book has been published, it's been well reviewed, and it's now into its third reprint because people are buying it. They're not buying it because they think, oh, what a good man he was, or we're very sorry about life in Salvador. They're buying it. They're buying the book because it is a book of real quality. It's real, remarkable writing, which I think will last for a long time. And if you don't believe me, I think you should go and buy a copy and see what you think.
If I had known Tommy better, I would have said, no, you're not going to join me in El Salvador, Tommy. Decades later, I learned that Tommy, shortly before coming to El Salvador, he wrote in his private diary of what I will call his demons. His introversion, his very shy, a strong feeling of being vulnerable and insecure. Later on, he also refers to his paranoia. In 1985, Tommy Greenan requested to join me as a volunteer missionary in El Salvador. Later, Brothers Basil Postlethwaite and Tim McConville followed. I'd never expected this development of a four-priest Edinburgh mission in Latin America. In 1982, I got a year's sabbatical from the Archdiocese to visit Latin America. My plan is to have an enjoyable refresher year there and then to return permanently to Scotland. During that year, I visited and accompanied nuns and priests working with the poor from Chile, almost at the Antarctic, far south of Latin America, up through a dozen countries to El Salvador and Guatemala in Central America. Tommy did an abbreviated version of the same, in a 90-day version of it, in 1986. He spent time with Father Joe McCarthy in the shanty town of El Salvador, in the desert outside Lima, Peru. People living in cardboard boxes. There's some 75,000 people in the one parish. There he also met with the father of liberation theology of the Church of the Poor, the famous priest Father Gustavo Gutierrez. In 1982, I knew I would enjoy my time in Latin America. Many of the poor welcomed me. They were kind to me, they were caring, they loved me. They got under my skin. I hadn't prepared myself for that, and I fell in love with them. Meeting my mother, a Celtal Indian, was a big surprise. The experience of my sabbatical year was discovering my new family. Not a matter of pleasing mankind is all one big family, but a beautiful, wonderful experience of it, experiencing my new family, being with them. The poor cared for my safety to the extent that they would have risked their own life for me. Tommy Greenan was thousands of miles away from his family, the Greenan family, here in Scotland. But it was a great joy for him and myself to be with our new family in El Salvador.
My name is Mary Kelly.
Nice to meet you, Mary. And tell us why you came.
Because I'd heard so much about Father Tommy over the years, and I eventually met him at Gillis, and I thought he was a very interesting, fascinating man, and definitely wanted to hear his story.
El Salvador, tierra de bendición. El sol brilla en mi tierra, mi pulgarcito hermoso, con el alma guerrera y un corazón grandioso. Pasamos tempestades, luchamos con valor, pero hoy se levanta más fuerte El Salvador. Las calles resplandecen, hay paz en mi nación. La esperanza renace, late fuerte corazón. El Salvador que será como un gigante en la historia. Con Bukele al frente, avanzamos con victoria. Dios bendice mi tierra, su luz nos guiará. Y el futuro brillante, nadie lo apagará. Oh. Se oye el himno en cada esquina, con orgullo y emoción. El pueblo está de pie, con fe en su nación. Trabajo y progreso se ven por doquier. El sueño salvadoreño ya se empieza a ver. Las calles resplandecen, hay paz en mi nación. La esperanza renace, late fuerte el corazón. El Salvador crecerá como un gigante en la historia. Con Bukele al frente, avanzamos con victoria. Dios bendice mi tierra, su luz nos guiará. Y el futuro brillante, nadie lo apagará. De oriente a occidente, del norte hasta el mar, unidos como hermanos, nadie nos va a parar. El Salvador es grande, su tiempo.
Well, Henry, we've got about 10 minutes or maybe just over for some questions. So I'll give people a chance to head to the chat now and to share some thoughts, some questions for you. But certainly what struck me there, it's the first time I've watched it through since the event itself, and your own comments that you've added in are quite incredible. You've given it quite a bit of context as we go through. But there's a question already there, which is, what led you and Tommy ultimately to go in the first place? What led you to leave Scotland for Latin America in the first place?
Right. Thanks, Callum. I had 5 happy years in the Cathedral and very happy in St Ninian's, a great parish, and the type of parish I'd kind of dreamed of, with great parish team and great parishioners. And kind of paradoxically, after some 6 years there in 1981, I started to feel that there was something missing in my priesthood. And so basically, I thought I needed some kind of refresher course or refreshing experience. And my plan was to go out to Latin America for that and come back and remain permanently in Scotland. So there's, and really what happened, I'd say the people loving me, and then basically I say it got under my skin and my defenses, and I loved them back, and then felt obliged that I had to give some years anyway, at least, to the people suffering in Latin America.
And Henry, on the night itself, that one of the extracts I read, I spoke about the fact that it was quite incredible to me, the level of suffering that you would have encountered. Of course, we see that incredible level of suffering without much effort today. You know, we only need to turn on our phones or TV screens to see the challenges facing the world, the incredible levels of suffering that are still, as you put it, the responsibility of us in the West. I wonder if you might speak to how your experience in places of suffering inform us today about what we can do in a very practical way, what action we can take to address the suffering of others in Palestine, Sudan, Ukraine, and around the world.
Anne was talking about, you know, seeing the news and so forth, that's so barbaric, the suffering, you know, children being starved to death or being deliberately shot in the head. And there's, I think we should get worried when that doesn't really upset us. That that we should have our eyes open so that we know what our brothers and sisters in the world are suffering, and that suffering should hit us in the gut. Tommy himself, very quickly in his first days in Chile, in Latin America, he saw the suffering, and then said, Tommy, he wrote in a diary of that time, we've got to see and hear and know what's going on. We've got to analyze it. We've got to talk about it, and we've got to act on it. There's Monday and also the previous week, I was out with people protesting outside Scottish government offices with a pot and knocking the pan out of the pot, making as much noise as possible. I think there's in doing something, no matter how little, things can change. And Jesus said, you know, a small seed can bring about the fantastic kingdom of God. If we all talk about what's going on, share about it. At the COVID time, a lot of people, ordinary people, were very creative, checking up on elderly people, people who were alone, offering to do shopping. I think we need a similar kind of reaction from all of us. And we can turn off the TV, and I think then we're turning off our humanity. We've got, I think, to feel the suffering and be present in some way or other in putting an end to it.
Thanks, Henry. And if we turn then to the issue of poverty, and if I look at Nicholas's question to start with, who thanks us for this evening and says, you know, poverty is structural. So how do we find ways of translating the experience of Tommy and others like yourself, Henry, into our own cultural context here in Scotland and across the UK?
I was in Glasgow at the weekend and 3 masses in St. Raphael's parish, and I sold 140 books. I think if parishioners or PPs invite me to them, and I'll give a mission sermon without asking for money for the missions, but I think it's a way of awareness raising. There's one of the things in different countries in Latin America, the poor asked me, and also they repeated their requests continually to Tommy, and the Palestinians in Gaza are doing the same thing. Tell others about what is happening. And the curse of Latin America is its incredible wealth, the natural resources, and the curse is the greedy people who call themselves investors who are there plundering. I think we've also got to work to find out the truth from media like Al Jazeera. And it's been scandalous, I think, the way the British BBC have been deluding us, trying to hide the truth from the world.
Henry, staying with the theme of poverty for a moment, if I can take the next question that's in the chat, could you share with us a bit about the mentality and the points of view of the governing class and the church hierarchy when faced with this debilitating poverty that you and Tommy were seeing day in, day out, to give us a bit more of an understanding of what they were thinking?
There's in Latin America, there's the word indio in Spanish means Indian, one of the first peoples. But if you use the word indio in Latin America, basically it's the same as black, but it has come to mean trash. And the use of that word is an example of incredible racism throughout Latin America. There's one of the people who was mayordomo in our church in San Fernando. He was probably the wealthiest person in the town. It's involved in getting the poor to rustle cattle from Honduras to El Salvador. He had some of his workers. A lot of them would have half their children die by the time they're 4 or 5 years old from things like a lack of milk. And this man, he had a lot of cows and whatnot. He had surplus milk, which he threw away rather than give it to his workers' families and to help to keep them alive. The coldness, I think, sadly, the coldness from some Israelis, their hard-heartedness, their seeing their brothers and sisters, the Palestinians, seeing them as animals rather than as people. And sadly then, ultimately, it goes back to the New Testament, what it says, the root of all evil is the desire, the wish for wealth, for money. The love of money, the desire for money is the root not of evil, but of all evil. And that kills the heart, it kills the humanity of people.
Maybe then just finally, Henry, if I could ask, and it comes through really strongly in the film, but if you might say a bit, and also in your own preaching for everyone who's had a chance to hear it, how did living in Latin America change your view of Britain and of America's influence in South America?
There's Maureen McAvoy spoke of me being knocked off my motorbike, and that the people were kind enough to come and see if I was okay. She doesn't remember quite correctly what I said. I have no doubt, and others have no doubt, that it was a murder attempt, smashing into my motorbike. The person then, he did give me a lift to the hospital, and I remember thinking, there's a good chance that he's a death squad person, and he's not going to bring me to the hospital. He's going to finish the task. I was a Briton, I was British, Scottish, and one would expect me then to go along to the British Embassy and explain what had happened. I didn't go there because Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister at the time, and I would presume most of the ambassadors were supporting Reagan, were supporting basically the multinational companies plundering the resources of the poor. And there's why go to somebody, this person who wasn't my friend, and he definitely wasn't a friend of my parishioners. There's in the church, I knew a lot of bishops in Salvador, and in my years there, there's about 7 or 8 superb bishops of the caliber of Oscar Romero. But sadly, there's a lot to her who live like princes and are on the side of the rich. There's the media, the Jewish media, the Israeli media, and the mainstream media. Sadly, I think the rich have taken it over and are quite brilliant in brainwashing us. And so I think those of us who have experience, who have knowledge about it, I think we've got to share that knowledge with everyone, and uncover the masks of lies.
Thank you very much for the effort you've put into the book, the film as well, Henry, and to our conversation tonight. I'm going to hand back over now to Jerry, and I think also a word then from yourself, Henry, as well. But Jerry, first of all, over to you.
Thanks, Alan.
I'll just let you unmute as well, Jerry.
Sorry. Thank you, Callum, and thank you, Henry, and thank you for what you shared with us tonight, and also for everybody else who's contributed and been involved tonight. I know you've spoken, Henry, about the number of books that you sold in Glasgow, which has probably left you a bit light on what you might be able to offer us tonight. But I think it'd still be useful if you could just maybe talk to us about if people want to get a hold of the book, how they do that.
I've got good news and bad news about the book. The good news is that it's been printed 3 times, and a couple of weeks ago I tried to order another 100 copies, and I was only able to buy 17, the last of the books that they had. So it's out of print at present, apart from I checked up on Amazon and there was one book available there, and I would reckon on the internet you might find 2 or 3 or 4 books possibly. The good news is that there's going to be a 4th printing of the book, with the Darton Longman Todd said that would be in autumn time. I buy in bulk, and so instead of the £20 a copy, I'm able to sell it at £10 for a copy. In Britain, if anybody wants 4 copies, I can get the 4 copies sent to them for a total of £40, delivered at their home, with free post and packaging. The way I've got to do it is that I've got to do the ordering, and so I'd need the details of the address and so forth, and I've got to pay Darton Longman Todd, the publishers, for it, and hopefully the buyers who are getting the books will reimburse me for that. And I think the details for that is, I think, are they with the recording, Jerry?
Yeah, they're on the screen just now, and we'll go with the recording as well.
Right. So there's well, people, if they could, they can contact me either by email or phone, and there's my suggestion is that obviously buy a book for themselves. I think it is a real quality book, and anybody receiving it as a present, their sons and daughters and friends, would greatly appreciate it. My suggestion too is contact your parish priest, and I'm happy to come along and repeat what I did in Glasgow. And the people that are keen to know, I think, what's going on, and to know the details of that.
Thank you, Henry. Just one question from me. Given that the next print run is going to be in October, is there a way that people can post pre-orders with you, or do they actually need to wait until October before they can start doing something like that?
I think the best thing is to tonight or tomorrow to start pre-ordering with myself.
Okay. Okay. Another thought for people to take away from tonight, ourselves here in SLN, we felt the book itself would be a really good text to use as for people coming together to use as a book club, and we SLN are more than happy to use our resource, our platform, as a vehicle for that if people wanted to engage in that. So if this is something you wanted to pursue, please get in touch with us, and we'll see if we can facilitate and coordinate some of that initiative. But given the how valuable a text it is, it might be something that groups of you might want to just think about actually coming together and to be able to use it as a way of reflecting, and also as a way of keeping telling the story, not just of Central America, but of all the places of conflict in our world. Much like what was said at the end of the chat there. That we have to keep on talking about these situations.
Yes. Great.
Okay, so we will now move to our closing prayer, and afterwards we'll have some conversation about things happening in the future.
Dear Lord, we thank you for your presence with us this evening. As we have remembered and celebrated the life, work and ministry of Father Tommy Greenan, we thank you for his passion, his anger and his courage as he fought against injustice and suffering.
We ask your blessing on his friend and companion, Father Henry McLaughlin, and we ask that their courageous lives may inspire us to continue your work of solidarity with the weak, the poor, and the oppressed, wherever we encounter them. And we ask you to bless us as we go forth from our meeting, in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Again, thanks to everybody. You'll see on the screen now just the details for the season of creation in September. We are co-badging this series. I wonder, Rab, are you available just to offer a couple of minutes on the series, if that's possible?
I think Rab's gone, actually.
Rab gone, okay.
Yeah.
Not to worry then. It's just the details are there. The link to the registration is also there. It's been circulated across numbers of organisations who are co-badging. You'll see them all noted there. If you are able, I think you would find this a valuable series to join with and to engage with. So if that's possible for you, please follow the link to the registration. For us in SLN going forward, we have an Advent series that's going to be getting publicised in the not too distant future. At present, we have a working title which is called, and I'm looking at my friends here, Frank and Anne, to help me out with the working title that we have. I'm putting them on the spot. It's very unfair of me.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I have got down here, nurturing seeds of hope
through
loving action.
That's it.
Thank you, Frank. Well done. So nurturing seeds of hope with loving actions. So we have already got 3 companions confirmed who are going to be with us. The President of Pax Christi, and her name, Martha
Ines Romero.
We have Alison Phipps, who has been with us many times, and we also have Elan Pape. If you get an opportunity to Google these people, you'll note the quality of the companions that are joining us for our Advent series. We will, in the early part of 2026, be asking people to come together with us, all our members, for a gathering, primarily to talk about the future and to talk about us as Scottish Laity Network and our direction, and to reach out to you, to get a sense from yourselves about how you see us moving forward. And how you can support us and assist us as we do that. So look out for that message coming into your email inboxes again in the not too distant future. So finally, if I can just offer once again a big thanks to everyone, and in particular to you, Henry, for being with us tonight and for being our companion and for the inspiration that you've offered, through your telling of the story of Tommy. It's much appreciated.
Well, thank you. It was a privilege to be allowed to participate this evening. Thank you all.
And we look forward to being with you, as we go through the year. Good night from us, and we'd ask you now to log off.
Thank you.